On the 10th of March, 2016, at the Four Seasons Hotel in Seoul, a computer program playing black put a stone on a point that human professionals had all but ruled out. It was move 37. By DeepMind's own account, the move had a 1 in 10,000 chance of being played, and it won AlphaGo the game. Sedol, who went on to lose the match 4-1, said he had assumed he was facing a machine doing probability calculations until he saw it. Surely, he said, AlphaGo is creative. So here's the answer to the title, before any of the setup. Machines now produce work that's new, that startles the specialists, and that turns out to be worth having, and the receipts carry dates. A mathematics result published in Nature in December 2023, an algorithm out of Google DeepMind in May 2025 that broke a record standing since 1969. Whether any of that counts as creativity depends on a definition our species has never agreed on. That disagreement, rather than the technology, is what this episode is really about. Before you can argue the answer, you have to pin down the question, and the definition most researchers reach for belongs to Margaret Boden, a cognitive scientist at the University of Sussex who was writing about machine creativity in 1990, decades before any machine gave her a reason to. Her test is that a creative idea has to be new, surprising, and valuable. All three at once. Novelty by itself is noise, value by itself is competence. She then splits creativity into 3 kinds, and that split is what turns this fight into something you can actually settle. The first kind is combinatorial. Familiar things welded together in an unfamiliar way, the way Niels Bohr pictured an atom as a tiny solar system. The second is exploratory. You stay inside an accepted set of rules and reach a corner of that space nobody had reached before. The third kind is transformational, and it's the rare one because you change the rules. Schoenberg walks away from the home key. Non-Euclidean geometry starts by denying Euclid's 5th axiom and then declines to fall apart. Hold move 37 up against that scaffold, and it gets less mystical and a lot more interesting. Nothing about Go changed that night in Seoul. The board was 19 lines by 19, the rules were the rules, and generations of human professionals had already ruled that point out. AlphaGo searched the space harder than any person ever has, and found a good idea sitting in a spot our conventions had fenced off. That's exploratory creativity, precisely as Boden defines it, and it isn't a consolation prize. Most human creativity is exploratory too. Worth remembering that the match was not a clean sweep, by the way. In Game 4, Lee played a move at 78 that the professional Gu Lee called divine. AlphaGo lost its footing, and he won. I lost, he said afterwards, but mankind did not. He retired from professional Go in November 2019, saying there was now an entity that could not be defeated. Go is a closed world with a scoreboard, so take the harder cases. In December 2023, Google DeepMind published a system called FunSearch in Nature. It pairs a language model with an automated checker. The model writes candidate programs, the checker discards the ones that are wrong, and whatever survives gets bred into the next round. Pointed at the cap set problem, a decades-old question in combinatorics, it found the largest cap sets anyone has ever found in some settings of the problem. DeepMind calls that the biggest increase in 20 years. In the company's own words, this was the first time a new discovery has been made for challenging open problems in science or mathematics using large language models. Its successor, AlphaEvolve, arrived in May 2025 with something that has a longer pedigree. It found a way to multiply 2 4x4 complex matrices using 48 scalar multiplications, beating a method that had stood unimproved for that case, since Volker Strassen published his in 1969. DeepMind then turned it loose on more than 50 open mathematical problems. By the company's own report, it matched the best-known answer around 3/4 of the time and improved on it in roughly one case in 5. One of those improvements was a new lower bound for the kissing number in 11 dimensions. One heuristic it wrote now runs in Google's own data centers, and, by the company's accounting, recovers on average 0.7% of Google's worldwide computing capacity. Now the case for the other side, which is stronger than the enthusiasts like to admit. In March 2021, 4 researchers, Emily Bender, Timnit Gebru, Angelina McMillan-Major, and Margaret Mitchell, published a paper at a computing fairness conference. It handed the field a nickname that has never washed off. A language model, they wrote, is stitching together sequences of linguistic forms observed in its vast training data, according to probabilistic information about how they combine, but without any reference to meaning. A stochastic parrot. In 2023, that critique got a laboratory version. Nicholas Carlini and his co-authors generated 175 million images out of stable diffusion. 94 of them, the paper reports, were near-exact copies of specific training pictures. 109, once they inspected the top results by eye. 94 out of 175 million is a vanishingly small fraction, and that isn't the point. The point is that the figure isn't 0. Underneath the machine, there's a floor made of other people's work, and every so often the output drops straight through to it. Which brings us to the tests, because people have gone and measured this. In 2023, Eric Guzik, Christian Bayaj, and Christian Gilda gave GPT-4 the Torrance tests of creative thinking and published the result in the Journal of Creativity. Ellis Paul Torrance first put that test in front of Minnesota schoolchildren in 1958. The model landed in the top 1% for originality and the 97th percentile for flexibility, scored against a benchmark of around 2,700 American college students. In February 2024, Kent Hubert, Kim Awa, and Daria Zablina put 151 people and GPT-4 through 3 divergent thinking tasks in scientific reports, and found the model ahead on every measure they took. So is that settled? 5 months earlier, Mika Koivisto and Simone Grassini had tested 256 people against 3 chatbots on the alternate uses task in the same journal, and their result was sharper. The chatbots beat the human average, and the best human ideas still matched or exceeded the machines. Now ask what any of these instruments actually score. Divergent thinking. The knack of reeling off unusual uses for a brick. It's a proxy for creative potential, and it was never built to tell you whether an idea was worth having, only whether it was unusual. Guzik's team said something close to that themselves, that they were careful at the time not to overinterpret their own numbers. Ada Lovelace saw the objection coming in 1843. Annotating Charles Babbage's analytical engine, she wrote that the machine has no pretensions whatever to originate anything, and that it can do whatever we know how to order it to perform. Turing christened that Lady Lovelace's objection in 1950 and spent a chunk of his most famous paper trying to knock it over. The modern version has shifted ground, though. Nobody sensible still argues the output is predictable. The fight now is over the third leg of Boden's definition, the value one, because value implies a judge. Take Jason Allen. On the 29th of August, 2022, a Midjourney image he called Theater d'Opera Spatial took first place in the digital art category at the Colorado State Fair, and $300 with it. Allen says he ran at least 624 prompts and revisions to get there. The picture came out of the model. The 624 rounds of prompting and rejecting did not. The U.S. Copyright Office reached the legal form of that conclusion in a report published on the 29th of January, 2025. Copyright doesn't extend to purely AI-generated material, and, in the office's words, prompts do not alone provide sufficient control. Allen's own registration had already been refused in September 2023. And then there's the question that makes this whole argument politically radioactive. Where did the training data come from? In August 2024, 3 authors, among them the novelist Andrea Bartz, sued Anthropic over the books used to build its models. Judge William Alsup ruled in June 2025 that training on lawfully purchased books was fair use, and that downloading millions of pirated copies to stock the library was not. Anthropic settled that September for $1.5 billion, reported as roughly $3,000 a book and the largest copyright settlement in United States history. Whatever you make of the law, notice what it does to the creativity question. If the novelty in the output is a rearrangement of a warehouse of human work, the live dispute stops being whether the rearrangement is clever. It becomes a question about who the cleverness belongs to. There's an empirical footnote here too. Anil Doshi and Oliver Hauser, writing in Science Advances in 2024, gave writers AI-generated story ideas and found the resulting stories were rated more creative and more enjoyable, especially from the less creative writers, and also more similar to one another. Individual creativity up. Collective variety down. Notice what the machine's cleanest wins have in common. FunSearch had a checker. AlphaEvolve had a checker. AlphaGo had the rules of Go and a win-loss column. In every case where a system produced something a mathematician would call creative without hesitating, there was a mechanical way to test whether the new thing was any good, and the system could run that test over and over all night without ever getting bored. Take the checker away, and the picture inverts. In a novel, a joke, a melody, value is a human verdict, and the model has no access to it, so a person has to sit in the loop and supply the judgment. 624 rounds of it, in Jason Allen's case. So the boundary this argument keeps hunting for probably doesn't run between people and machines at all. It runs between the domains where worth can be computed and the domains where worth has to be felt. So where does that leave an honest answer? Combinatorial creativity the machines plainly have, since recombination is roughly what the architecture does for a living. Exploratory creativity they have demonstrably, and in a few narrow places better than we do, with a Nature paper and a broken 1969 record to show for it. Transformational creativity is where I'd pump the brakes. Every system in this episode was handed its conceptual space by a human being. The rules of Go, the definition of a cap set, the shape of a matrix. Rewriting the rules from the inside, the Schoenberg move, is the thing nobody has clearly demonstrated, and the reason it's hard to demonstrate is that we've never built a test for it. We can't agree on what would even count as passing. Lovelace wrote in 1843 that the analytical engine had no pretensions to originate anything. And about that engine, she was exactly right. What ought to bother you isn't the machines. It's that we've had 183 years to build the instrument that would tell us the day she stopped being right. We still haven't built it, and there's every chance we walk straight past that day without anyone noticing.